Hello everyone, this is Monica Hayden, and I want to show you something that literally almost knocked my socks off the other day when I looked it up. I have not seen this particular concept anywhere on the internet yet, so I thought it would be really fascinating for you. For those of you that have been following the gospel and the stars and the constellations of the zodiac, as well as the blood moons, I've never seen these two things put together yet, and I think you'll be just astonished, as I was. So, first off, for those of you that are not really familiar yet with the Jewish feast days, the Jewish feasts were set up in Leviticus 25 after the children of Israel had been delivered from Egyptian bondage with the Exodus. Of course, it was kicked off with the Passover. Remember, if you remember the story in Exodus, the little lamb was slain, which was a symbol of the Messiah who would be slain for our sins. He was slain, and they put the blood over the doorpost of their house wherever they were staying, and the angel of death that came through the land of Egypt passed over and did not kill the firstborn child in any house that had the blood over their doorpost. Okay, for those of you that are familiar with that story, I'm not going to go into detail. It's in the book of Exodus. We also know from the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in the New Testament, that Jesus Christ was killed, crucified on the day of Passover, at the same time that that little lamb was being killed, that they killed every year in remembrance of their freedom. He was buried and was in the grave during the unleavened bread feast. And then, because of the nature of the way that that actual year happened, Friday was the Passover, Saturday was the day he was in the grave, and Sunday was the offering of the first fruits, which was the day he was resurrected, along with many others who were the first fruits of his of his work, basically. The Bible in the Gospel says that at the earthquake that happened when he was resurrected, many others were resurrected and walked around Jerusalem talking. Okay, so those three feasts happen exactly on the days of Jesus' first coming for us. And then, of course, 50 days later, when all the Jews were back in Jerusalem, there's 2.5 million Jews at these feasts, Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles every year. God required them to come 3 times a year to Jerusalem. At the Festival of Weeks, which is the Pentecost, the Holy Spirit was poured out. Now there's some speculation, which makes some logical sense to me, that if Jesus came exactly on his first coming and did his work exactly on these feast days, would it not make sense that in some way the second group of feasts in the fall, so these are the beginning of the year and this is the 7th month of the year in the fall, would it not make sense that his second coming may be correlated with these feasts? Because we know from Paul and other places that Jesus used to come at the last trump. There's a lot of trumpet language around it. The Feast of Trumpets is the beginning of the judgment, and then we move on and we have judgment. The Bible talks about how after Christ comes, we'll have 1,000 years millennial of where we will live and reign with Christ, and we will judge with him. And then whatever judgments happened, the Day of Atonement was 10 days later, and that's when those judgments were meted out. There's been some misunderstanding that the Day of Atonement was the judgment itself. The judgment actually begins with the Feast of Trumpets. It goes for 10 days, and it ends on this most solemn of all days, the Day of Atonement, where the judgments are finalized. They're just handed out at that point. And then the Feast of Booths is the Feast of Ingathering, or it is a time of partying and rejoicing. No more solemnity there. So I wanted to point out, for those of you that may or may not be familiar, that this first blood moon happens on the very first of the 7 feasts that God laid out in Leviticus 23. The final blood moons that are happening this year and next year happen on the bookend of the final feast, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. So 2 years in a row, because if you remember in the story of Joseph, where Pharaoh had a dream 2 times, he dreamed about the corn swallowing the cows and whatnot. He dreamed 2 things that were the same meaning, and Joseph told the Pharaoh, because God sent that dream to you 2 times, it means it was from God. So that to me is indicative that if he's sending these on these feasts, the Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles, 2 years in a row, it seems to me that he's saying, look, I told you to watch for blood moons, here they are. So I'm not saying that I'm predicting anything about the timing of the coming of Christ or the events that will go along with these blood moons. We can't predict, but all I think is that God is telling us to watch, just watch what's going on. All right, so I want to bring, with the blood moons and the Jewish calendar, I want to bring your attention to 2 things. One is that this little Passover lamb is killed sometime either in March or April. Okay, and then the judgment feasts happen sometime in our calendar between September and October. Now, I'm going to take you to my next slide. Here we go. So this is what we were just looking at, just so we have it for reference. But I want to show you the ancient zodiac calendar. So the dates of the zodiac signs have been altered in more modern times, but these were the dates, as far as I can ascertain, of what these signs fell under in ancient times, at the time of Christ, at the time of the Exodus. Okay? So March and April is when the Passover happened. March and April, mid-Nisan, Nisan 14, happens always under the sign of the Lamb. And I found that extremely fascinating. And if you go and you look at my channel on YouTube, I have a series in there in a playlist called The Star of Bethlehem, which, although it talks about the Star of Bethlehem, also talks about the sky and what was happening in the sun, moon, and stars at the death, the day of the cross, and how Aries, the lamb, had its heart blotted out by an eclipse. It's just one of the most profound and amazing things I've ever seen. So I thought that was interesting, that the Passover always happens under the lamb. But then I was just flabbergasted to also find that the Feasts of Judgment, the trumpets leading to the Day of Atonement 10 days later, are also happening under the judgment scales of Libra in September or October. See, Tishri, judgment feasts, September, October. I don't know, just food for thought, and kind of a nod, I think, from God, that He is the author of the feasts. He is the author of the zodiac, the story in the stars, the gospel that's hidden in the messages of the meanings of the stars. If you go and you see my video on that, you'll get what I'm talking about. But the sky itself tells us that Jesus was to come, He was to suffer, He was to die, He was to give us new life, and he is coming as judge, and He is coming again, and He's coming swiftly, and He will reign as the King. It's an astonishing story, and it correlates exactly with the meanings behind the feasts as well. I will see you next time I make a video. Keep watching. If you haven't already, follow my channel so you don't miss anything. Bye-bye.